G'day, I'm Pete. I'm the Aussie Bush Cop, and today we're recording at Perena Place, where all the technical and production stuff happens for our podcasts. And I'm going to tell you some more stories today. G'day everybody. Thanks for joining me again. I have some stories to tell you this morning about drink driving. And when people talk about drink driving in Australia, generally they call it DUI, standing for drive under the influence. And that's quite incorrect, because the most times that people are charged with drink driving, it's actually called PCA, which stands for prescribed concentration of alcohol. And the difference between the two is that DUI is based solely upon observations of police. And I won't bore you with the reasons, but there's some times when police can't use PCA, and that is when you get pulled over by the police, you're subjected to a roadside breath test, and if that proves positive, you're then arrested and taken to the police station, where you are then further subjected to a breath analysis machine, which is a piece of technical or scientific equipment. And so in my time in the coppers, I only ever used DUI twice. That will show you how rare that it actually is. And so the stories I'm going to share with you today, I think there's 8 of them all up, and they will all be PCA. Just for viewers outside of Australia, Australian police have the power to pull any motorist over for no reason and subject them to a roadside breath test. I've seen quite a number of American podcasts where they have to, in my opinion, go through a fairly complicated or clumsy process of someone being subjected to a test on the side of the road, where they walk the straight line and can you stand on one leg and touch your nose with your finger and all that sort of stuff. Australian police, it's very rare for police here to have to do that. We just have a machine that every police car carries, and the person breathes into it by counting to 10. And then if it's alcohol on the breath, then that gives you a reading on the machine, and if it's more than if it's 0.5 or above, then they're under arrest and they go back to the station for a breath analysis. The first story happened when I was off duty, and I was in a small town not far from where I was stationed, and I was just driving into this town to do some shopping. And as I pulled into the town, a car came from my right at speed through an intersection and failed to give way to me. And I had to jump on the brakes to avoid a collision, which is slightly annoying. And then I saw this car pull up, and there was a passenger, an adult passenger in the car. And when they pulled up at the shops, the adult passenger got out of the car and went into the shop. I then parked quite a distance away, so I didn't want to see what sort of car I was driving, because it was my private car. I got out and I walked up to him, and the passenger window was down. So I just leaned in through the passenger window and said to the driver, "Well, that's the worst bit of driving I've seen in a fair while." And then noticed that he was just reeked of alcohol, was coming into his out of his lungs. And I said to him, "Mate, you're drunk, aren't you?" And so then I arrested him, and we were reasonably close to where the police station was in this town. In that town there was 2 police stationed there. And I got on the phone and I rang the head station, which is about half an hour away, told them what was happening, and just asked them to send out some police, on-duty police, to the station where I was walking him to. That happened, and they just took over. They did the breath test and it proved positive, and he was charged with a drink driving offence, and it's either low, medium or high. There was actually there's other offences called special range, which is for people with provisional driver's licence and the like. Anyway, so that happened, and that was more or less the end of my involvement there. Would have been probably weeks later, I was on duty one night, and I just, for no reason other than just a random breath test, and I saw this car. It was out of the town, like out in the country area, and I followed it because I used to, the vast majority of the time, I worked alone, and so when I was going to do these things, I generally tried to pull people over. Yeah, maybe if it was possible when they were in a town, just so that there was other people around. Anyway, I followed this car for a few kilometres, and it came into the same town where the first incident happened, putting the red and blue lights on, pulled him over, and did a breath test, and he straight away started to bemoan the fact that I was targeting him because it was the same bloke, and I had no idea that was the case. Anyway, again, he went over again, and so I strategically bailed him to appear at the same court date as the first one. Now, as you can imagine, that he lost his licence for a period of time, but he was absolutely quite irritated and thought that I was targeting him, and that just wasn't the case. The second story I have for you happened in a bigger place where it had a regional hospital in it, and we pulled this car over. It was in suburbia, within the suburbia of this town. Pulled this car over for no reason other than a random breath test, and the female went over, failed the test, and she either revealed to us or we found out that she was a doctor who had just been to this regional hospital where she had conducted a medical procedure which required putting a needle into someone's spine. And because she was a doctor, ordinarily people would go into the cage. Because she was a doctor, we just put her in the back seat of our truck. And I can tell you that the cabin reeked of alcohol. In particularly, it was wine. And so she was subjected to the breath analysis at the police station. She failed that. I can't remember what reading she went, but she was over. And I wasn't in charge of that matter. My partner was in charge of that matter. And given that what she had just finished doing at the regional hospital, my partner, apart from doing the normal charge, did a report to the Australian Medical Association, highlighting that what she'd done. And I cannot believe that anyone in that where she did this procedure was inside an operating theatre. I cannot believe that other people in that operating theatre could have failed to have noticed the alcohol on her breath. And that was quite disturbing to me. And I don't know what the Australian Medical Association did, but I believe that we did the right thing. The next story is a bit funny. We pulled a car over for a breath test. He was a tradesman of some sort, and he failed the test. And so we were just leading him to put him in the back of the truck, when he decided that he wasn't going to come with us, and he just, to use an Australian expression, he bolted, which means he just ran. And he was not from the area. He's actually from another state. I think he might have been from Queensland. And he just ran, but funnily enough, he started running towards the police station. He had no idea what he was doing. And I was in hot pursuit on foot after him. And I'm running up the street, and my partner jumped back into our truck, did a U-turn, and my partner's following us. This bloke ran out of breath, and he stopped on the footpath, and then he went to move towards me, like in what I would consider a threatening move. And so I did what's called a check drill, which means I pushed him backwards using the heel of both of my hands. Now, immediately behind him was a hedge. There was a hedge there that had just been neatly trimmed. And because he was intoxicated, he fell backwards, and he fell into this hedge. Now, you probably know how your brain can think really, really fast, and everything seems really, really slow when something like that is happening, like it's happening in slow motion. And I could just see him falling backwards into this hedge. And my thoughts were, one of these freshly trimmed branches which were probably about as thick as your little finger. One of them is going to impale him. I was really concerned for his welfare. Anyway, he managed to not become injured by that, but when my partner got there just immediately after that, and we grabbed hold of him and lifted him up, and it was almost like something out of a Warner Brothers cartoon where you see one of the characters run through a wall and they leave the exact impression of their arms and legs, and when we lifted him out of the hedge, you could see this perfect impression of his body as he fell backwards into it. Anyway, so not only did he fail the test back at the station, he was also charged with escape lawful custody. If you ever want to win a bet with someone at a pub or anywhere else and someone says, "Oh, I've never been arrested," you can almost guarantee if they have a driver's licence that they've been arrested, because when you are stopped by police for whether it's they're checking your licence or they're checking your tyres or they're doing a breath test, for that period of time you are under arrest. Under arrest simply meaning you're not free to leave. So that bloke, the reason I'm bringing that up is that bloke was in lawful custody and he escaped lawful custody. And so he was charged with that offence. And he must have pled guilty to it, because that's the last I remember. He must have just went and pled guilty and was dealt with by the court. The next story was when I went to one of my one-man stations. And I think part of the duties of any good police officer in small places like that is to go to the local pub. And so I went down to the local pub, and of course, when there's a new police officer in town, it's always a matter of great interest, and you might say curiosity, is who is this bloke, you know? And so it was my policy to make myself as available as possible. And that's great, good policing. You get people tell you things, they get to know you, they get to know you haven't got two heads and that you're reasonable and fair-minded. Anyway, but they also need to know that you're going to be fair and, when need be, tough. So when I just got to this new station and I was down at the local hotel, it was in the afternoon, I recall. It was still daylight anyway. Got down there, and as soon as I walked in, I noticed that there was a fellow sitting in the beer garden, and he was, you know, and I think I was sitting in the beer garden as well. I'd noticed he had a few beers, a few schooners of beer, which are large-sized drinks. And then, well, no problems there, but then he walked out into the car park, got into his car and drove out of the car park area and did a burnout, which means he just deliberately lost traction with his rear wheels. He just smoked the rear wheels up, and I thought, oh, God. Anyway, and then he just calmly drove back into the hotel and telling people he just bought the car and he wanted to see what it was capable of doing. I walked up to him and said, "Mate, do you know who I am?" He goes, "Yeah, you're the new policeman." I said, "Yeah, mate, and you're an idiot." So I arrested him, walked him up to my station, same thing as the one before, rang the police that were on duty. They came out, did the breath test, and, you know, I don't know what he went, I can't remember now. And that was just really, really stupid. And then the next story happened. I was working out of this particular night out of a pretty big station because they were short-staffed this particular evening. And my partner for the night was a probationary constable, and he was as keen as mustard to arrest somebody. So he was young, he had the eyes of an eagle, and he was watching anything and everything. Anyway, we're driving through this fairly small town during our shift, and he saw on the road through the town, there were they're running parallel to that road. There was another road a few hundred metres away, and he watched the car. I was driving the truck, so I wasn't particularly watching what he was looking at, but he saw a car drive along, and then it just stopped. The lights turned off. I must have been watching because I saw that. The lights turned off, and then it just stopped. And I was pretty familiar with this small town, and I knew where it stopped. There was no houses. There wasn't any houses anywhere near it, so immediately that strikes us as a bit curious as to why that he just stopped, the lights turned off and then stopped. So we drove down to where this car was, and it was in perfect darkness. And when we pulled up and we put our lights on the car, I could see that the driver's seatbelt was extended, as in someone was still in the seatbelt, but it was you couldn't see the driver. So I got out. I guess my partner was with me somewhere, and I got out and I had the torch and I shone it on the car as we walked up. And there's this young driver who only had a provisional driver's licence, which meant that his blood alcohol limit was maybe just 0.2. And he's feigning to look under the dashboard. I said, mate, what are you doing? Oh, there's something wrong with my car and I'm looking under the dashboard. You know, didn't ring true, of course. So we subjected him to a roadside breath test, which proved positive, which meant that he had alcohol in his breath, and then we took him back to the big police station, and he was subjected him to a breath analysis, which he failed. And to top it all off, the reason he was in this particularly small town was that earlier in the evening, he lived in the big town where we took him back to, but the reason he came to this small town was that he had a girlfriend there that he just maybe an hour or so earlier had an argument with on the phone, and he's trying to make it up to her by coming out to see her. So maybe he had a drink to give him some courage to talk to her, or whatever reason. But anyway, so it was a double whammy for him. He probably lost his girlfriend and got arrested on the same night. So that was a bit sad for him. The next story is really, really quite horrible. One night, I was working this happened in Dubbo, and one night it was really cold and wet night, and we were actually responding to a job of some localised flooding across a highway. So we drove out to where this job was going to be, but we came across, before we got there, we came across quite a line of traffic stopped on the highway for, at that point, an inexplicable reason. So I was what they call the observer that night, which means I was in the passenger seat, and I got out with a torch and walked up past these parked cars. We put our red and blue lights on so the people were alerted as to something was going on. And then I saw there was a semi-trailer that was stopped at a right angle going across the road. It was actually pulling out of a yard on our left, and it was carrying cattle. So this truck had a load of cattle on it, and it was actually stopped on the road. And the car, a utility, what we call in Australia a ute, was jammed underneath the truck. And the driver, there was no passenger in the car, and the driver was alive, but quite badly injured. He had at least a broken leg, maybe broken legs. But the view of it was really horrible. Like, he was inside the car and he was twitching because of his injury. He was twitching like he had high voltage electricity going through his body. He was really twitching quite badly. We, of course, got the ambulance there and the rescue unit, and they extricated him from the wreck. He wasn't subjected to a roadside breath test, of course, but what happens is that anyone involved in a motor vehicle collision is, by law, has blood taken from them, which is then examined for alcohol and drugs. And he failed that. He was quite intoxicated. I think he might have went high range, which means he just shouldn't have been out driving. And he just didn't see. Apparently, he just didn't see this truck which is coming across the road, and he just ploughed into the side of it and underneath it. So then the last story for today is when I was stationed at one of my one-man stations. There was a bloke that I knew who was routinely going to the local hotel and drinking hour after hour after hour. Fair enough, good for business. But he would drive there, and where he lived, of course, I knew where he lived and I knew where the hotel was. He could easily walk there. There was no issues at all. He wasn't young, but he was certainly quite mobile. And I spoke to him, might say privately one day, and I said, I won't say his name, said, listen, Joe, just don't drive to the pub. It looks really bad. You're driving there. It's perfectly obvious and plain that you are there hour after hour, and then you drive home. It looks bad. It's not good, and you're going to stop doing it. And I gave him a warning. And he accepted that warning in good grace. And I thought, well, that's the end of the matter. But it wasn't. One day, and where my home and my home and police station was, I could easily see the hotel. And I was on, this particular day, I was on afternoon shift. And so I'd seen his car was there for a number of hours before I started my shift. And the vast majority of the time I did my duties at another much bigger regional town. And so I made an inquiry after I got into where I was doing my duties. I made an inquiry which revealed that he was still there. So I then decided that I would drive out and I'd park just around the corner so that he couldn't see me. And I just waited there and until he left, which was not much longer after I got there. He drove around the corner. I pulled him over, subjected him to a roadside breath test, which he failed. And I remember his wife was in the car with him as well. And she was explosive with rage towards me that I would do this to him. And I just more or less ignored her. Again, the driver was full of good grace. He certainly didn't carry on. He just complied. And he failed the test, and he was, formally dealt with by the court, which meant he would have lost his licence. So you can't just keep giving warnings. And when you've seen the things that I've seen, and there's things way worse than what I've just shared with you, and I may share with you some of those other stories, those other consequences of people that drive and then and crash and hurt other people and themselves. So that's enough for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.